We broke the sound barrier. We broke the sound barrier. The Leap Whirlwind build was fast, but this is faster. I did some testing and it felt that I barely even scratched the surface on how fast you can farm with this build. My fastest time was 69 seconds to win, but someone else was testing with me and they hit 62 seconds, and it can go even faster than that. Good news for anyone that's tried the Whirlwind Leap build, this isn't a big swap. Here's the run of that 69, and then I'll break down the build. Don't blink. I'm going to swap over my Whirlwind Barbarian to polearms and see how it works. And maybe that'll give me like the damage edge that I need. I hate when it does that. Just like for some reason doesn't put me past. Oh, I had to get the worst map to be on. Damn it. Oh no. I was making such good time too. Oh, that was fast. That was fast. That was I think 109 maybe? Now that right there, that's fast. When you get into this build, if you get a faster run, let me know. I want to know what the max speed that we can get out of this build. I'm going to go over the skill tree now. We're going to start with 2 points into Lunging Strike. This is so we can unlock Whirlwind. We're going to go down through Enhanced Whirlwind. Just 1 point here. We're going to go 3 points into Pressure Point for a 30% chance to make your enemies vulnerable. This is going to be on core skills, which is going to be your Whirlwind. Moving down, we're going to go into Rallying Cry. This is going to give us Fortify while we use it. If you need Fury generation or you're running into Fury issues, you can swap this out for Tactical Rallying Cry. This will give you a little bit of boost of Fury right away, and it will also give you additional resource generation. There are ways that we're going to get to later on the skill tree to generate Fury, so this may not be 100% necessary with this build. So we're going to put it back into Strategic Rallying Cry. We're going to max out Imposing Presence for a little bit more life. And then we're going to come down to 5 points into Warcry. We're going to be maxing this out because we want to get the most out of it that we can. We're going to go up all the way through Power Warcry. While you're doing your speed runs, this is going to give you a little bit of extra damage. Right now, we're looking at 34.5% damage. This adds an extra 10 if there are 6 enemies around you. So use Warcry when you have a big group that you've just leaped into or charged into. That'll give you that 10% extra damage. We're going to go 3 points into Swiftness. Remember, this is a speed farming build. We want to go fast. Anywhere you get movement speed, that's where we're going into. We're going to do 3 points into Booming Voice here. This is going to extend the duration of our Rallying Cry and our Warcry. We're going to be going into Raid Leader. Because we're going to be using Tyrael's Might for this build, we want to try and stay as healthy as we can because you need to be at full life. This is going to just make it a lot easier on the run to get us through with Tyrael's Might almost working 100% of the time. 1 point into Charge. We're going to go all the way down through Power Charge. Reduce charges cooldown by 2 seconds for each enemy hit, up to 6 seconds. We're not really going to worry about this too much on bosses. The bosses are going to die pretty quick, and Leap will be used more during fight than Charge will. We're going to be using Charge for its Unstoppable, though. Become unstoppable when you rush forward. This is going to activate one of our aspects later that's going to give us more movement speed to keep these runs going at optimal speed. Going into Leap, all the way down through Power Leap. If Leap damages one enemy, you gain 40 Fury. We're going to be leaping all the time. So when we leap and we hit anybody, we're going to generate Fury. It's going to give us our Berserking also. How is it going to give us Berserking? When we go into Aggressive Resistance here, we're going to go down into Battle Fervor. Anytime that we use either Leap or Charge, it's going to give us Berserking for 3 seconds. This is going to be how we're going to keep up Berserking through the entire run. We're either going to be leaping or charging through most of the run, so we're always going to have this up. We're going to put 1 point into Prolific Fury just for a little bit more Fury generation. Fury generation helps us with one of the aspects later on that we'll talk about when we get there. Moving down, we're going to put 1 point into Hamstring, and then we're going to go 3 points into Cut to the Bone. This is going to give our bleeding effects 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. We got to make sure that they're vulnerable, which is why we took Pressure Point up here to help make them vulnerable. There's other ways that we're going to be able to make things vulnerable, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. We're going to go 1 point into Thick Skin so that we can unlock counteroffensive. This gives us 12% more damage when we're over 50% fortify. We're going to go into Call of the Ancients. This will be more for just a quick little burst of damage when you get to your bosses, but you can use it throughout the run as you're going. We're going to go into Ranks of Heavy-Handed. We're putting 3 here. This build is going to rely heavily on critical strike damage, and this is going to give us a really big boost to critical strike damage. We're going to go 3 points into Wallop. We're going to be running a 2-handed mace on Whirlwind, so this is going to give us an extra 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. And then finally, we're going to be going 1 point into Gushing Wounds. This is going to be incredibly important. Gushing Wounds is how you're going to be doing all your damage. The way that Gushing Wounds works, causing an enemy to bleed, you have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to increase the bleed amount by 140% of your critical strike damage bonus. So what does that mean? Let me show you. When you look at your stat line, I have 86% chance to critical strike. What that means is that I have 86% chance to proc Gushing Wounds. After it procs, it will apply bleed. The bleed amount that it applies is going to be 140% of 5,090 critical strike damage. When Gushing Wounds procs, it takes the bleed that would normally be applied and it multiplies it by 7,000%, because that's what we get out of taking the 5,000 and multiplying it by 1.4%. So it is a huge increase to your bleed damage, and this is how you do all of your single target damage. If you don't have high critical strike chance or high critical strike damage, you're not going to be doing as much damage to single targets or even to just regular targets as you're going through these runs. When I first built this character, the very first thing that I did, I found any piece of gear that I had that had critical strike chance greater affixes, and I made sure that I put 2 masterworking crits into them. You can get masterworking crits on critical strike chance in 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of gear if you need it. So you want to try and get as many as you can right off the bat. That will allow you to take whatever your critical strike damage is, multiply it by 1.4, and then that will apply to your bleed. This is how you're going to start off the build doing a lot of damage. So don't focus too much on all the other stats right away. This is going to be the most important one to get this build up and running. Let's take a look at the Paragon board. We're going to hop into the starter board. For the starter board, we're going to be running Wrath. Moving up, we're going to be going into the Flawless Technique board. We won't be taking the Legendary Node because we're going to be using a 2-handed weapon. Inside this board, we're going to be running Disemboweled. Killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to reduce the cooldowns of your non-ultimate active cooldowns. This means all of your shouts, leap, and charge. So this is actually going to be incredibly beneficial. When we're killing things so fast, you're going to notice cooldowns very, very quickly. Moving over, we're going to be going into the Decimator board. Every time that we make an enemy vulnerable, this is going to give us a 10% multiplicative increased damage. Whirlwind does not overpower, so we're not really going to get a ton out of the overpowering a vulnerable enemy as an additional 10%. However, leap and charge can both overpower, so we will see this occasionally, but not too often. For the glyph, we're going to be running Might. This is going to give us a 8x increased damage while we're using a 2-handed weapon. Anywhere that we can fit any multiplicative numbers, we're going to be putting more and more in, because that's how we're going to be stacking damage. Moving up, we're going to be going into the Blood Rage node. Killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant Berserking for 5 seconds. Remember, we're killing enemies incredibly fast. This is a speed run, so things are going to die very quickly, so we're going to see Berserking almost the entire run, even if we're not hitting our leap and our charge. So this is going to be another added layer of making sure that Berserking is up. And Berserking is the key to doing damage. And we'll talk about that later when we get into the aspects and the gear. The second part of this, your damage is increased by 10% of your damage while Berserking bonus, up to a maximum of 30%. This is why we try and make sure that we hit that 300 on your damage while Berserking bonus. Now I'm barely there, and it actually gave me the 30%, so you can be just under, just over Even if you're way over that 300%, it's okay. It's not going to make or break your build. You will still get additive damage from damage while berserking, but you want to try and hit that 300% so you can put other stats in different places for it. In this board, we're going to be running Ire. This is where I get my last little bit of damage while berserking, and this also gives me a 10% damage reduction against elites while berserking. Going up, we're going to be going into the Carnage board. We don't need to be taking this legendary node because we don't use attack speed for Whirlwind. Next season, we will. In this board, we're going to be running Martial. After casting a shout skill, the active cooldowns of every non-shout skill are reduced by 2 seconds, which means that if we're charging or we're leaping, and those are both on cooldown, if we use a shout, we get 2 seconds off of both of those. They won't have very long cooldowns either, so this is actually going to be really big in getting those two abilities off cooldown. Coming all the way down, we're going to be going into the Bonebreaker board. In this board, we're going to be running Exploit. This is going to give us some extra vulnerable damage, and in just a couple seconds, we're going to talk about why we're going to need vulnerable damage, but this is actually very important. We're going to be double dipping damage on your vulnerable, so this is really important here. We're also going to use this as a source of vulnerable damage. When an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. This cannot happen more than once every 20 seconds. Doesn't really work too well on bosses unless you can kill those bosses within that 3 seconds, but for most monsters throughout the run, they aren't alive for 3 seconds. So this is going to be perfect for cruising through at a really, really fast pace. We're going to move over into the Warbringer board. In this board, we're going to be running Blood Feeder. This is going to give us a little bit of extra additive damage to bleeding enemies, and we're also going to have 5% critical strike chance against bleeding enemies. And finally, we're going to come up into the Hemorrhaged board. And this is where the vulnerable damage is important. Your bleeding damage is increased by 15% of your vulnerable damage bonus. Now we're taking all of that bleed that we added on with Gushing Wounds. We're also adding a 56% increase multiplicative to our bleed. So your bleed starts to stack up really, really high. When you start adding in things like Hemorrhage, Cut to the Bone, or Gushing Wounds, we're going to be stacking a ton of bleed with this build. That's Paragon board. We're going to go over the affixes, aspects, and all of the tempers for this build. For the gear, and just like the other build, we are still running all 4 Uber Uniques. I started putting together all of the gear that I need to run a non-Uber Unique build, but it takes some time to find the gear, masterwork it, level it up, so I'm working on it. That will be coming out very soon. I'm going to go over the gear for this build. We'll talk about a little bit of alternates if you're going to need to do something, but for this build and the way that it's running on this character, I'm running all 4. So to go over them, we're starting with the Harlequin's Crest. Resource generation here. I actually am going to mess around with probably masterworking more into this. And the reason that we're going to be masterworking more into this is one of the aspects that we're going to get into later on. Once we get there, we'll hop back into this and I'll tell you what my thoughts are, and I'm going to test it, and it may not work, but we'll go over it. For the chest piece, we're running Tyrael's Might. This is going to be a source of AoE bleed for us. This is why we took Raid Leader in the skill tree, because we want to make sure that we're at maximum life the entire time. When at full life, your skills unleash a barrage dealing damage. That damage seems low, 6,374. When it actually gets multiplied through all of our crazy amount of multipliers, that can get up into the millions. For the masterworking, I went into max resistance to all elements. This is how I got to 81% here. If you don't have a greater affix on your resistance to all, then put one into this too. I got really lucky. This only took me like 1 or 2 tries to get the max resistance all to a triple, so don't stress about it if you can't get that. The resistance all, if it's not a greater affix, is going to be very helpful because you want to try and run all diamonds in your jewelry. And I have one other affix that is a greater affix for resistance to all. This is going to help get us to that 81%. You do not need to be at 81%. There are a ton of builds out there that run at 70. So if you can get this to 70 or anywhere over in between, that is still going to be great resistances. So do not stress about getting everything to 81. I know that it's great seeing green numbers, but it is okay if you're above 70. For the gloves, we're going to be running elements. The affixes that you want here are actually not attack speed. We're going to look at our possible affixes. This is what you're going to be looking for here. Chance to make enemies vulnerable. That's going to be your optimal affix. For the other two, we're going to be running critical strike damage and critical strike chance. I got lucky with a triple roll here, but if you don't get a triple, that is okay. Doubles will get you very, very high. Don't stress about it. For the tempers, we're going to be running damage while berserking. This helps me get to that 300%. And then crowd control duration for this. Moving down to the pants, we're going to be running Undying. when you're running these Whirlwind builds, whether you're running on a mouse and keyboard or on a controller, you're going to be finding a way to tap the Whirlwind button and not hold it. If you're tapping it, you're going to be casting more Dust Devils, and I'll talk about that when we get to the aspects for it. You're also going to be healing yourself every single time you tap it, which is going to keep us at full health for Tyrion's Might. Between Raid Leader, your potions, and Undying, you will always stay at full life, and if you're not, you go back up very, very quickly. For your affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Armor. For the armor with this setup, you don't need a greater affix. If you look here, you have 9,230% is the maximum armor that you ever need. If you're over that, it's not doing anything for you. You don't have to worry if you're a little bit over, if you're 500 over, that's okay. If you're at 12,000 or at 14,000, somebody told me they were at 45,000 armor, drop it. Get rid of it. Make sure you're closer to this number here. For the tempers, we're running crowd control duration and imposing presence. In the planner, we're going to make sure that I put in the optimal masterworking crits. What you see on the screen isn't exactly what I wanted. I'm still working on my gear too. This is a journey. Most people's character will not ever be 100% complete or exactly what they want, and that's what I love about this season. So follow the planner, because this is going to be a little bit different than what you see there. For the boots, we're going to be running Ghostwalker. This is going to help keep our movement speed up. When you hit Whirlwind, even if you just tap it, your movement speed drops significantly. If we're running Ghostwalker, and we charge, because remember, charge grants Unstoppable. While Unstoppable, for 4 seconds after, you gain 25% movement speed. For the affixes, we're going to be running movement speed, resistance to all, and Warcry ranks. Ranks to Warcry help reduce the cooldown of Warcry, and it also increases the damage done. So this is going to be really important that we're going to be running ranks here, because we want to do as much damage as we possibly can to get through these runs as fast as we can. For the tempers, I don't want Barrier Generation. My boots are bricked. I just have not found a pair that is that good anywhere else. So I'm just waiting for something to drop, and then I'll put it on. The other temper, we're running movement speed. We want to be running as much movement speed as we possibly can for this. I'm at 197.4. Cap is 200%. This right here, when you're unstoppable and you're running Ghostwalkers, if you're using Rallying Cry, you're at max speed. If you're not using Rallying Cry, you're a little bit lower, but we have a fix for that too, if that's what you want to do. Moving down to the bludgeoning weapon. This is going to be the source of all of your bleed. We're going to be running Berserk Ripping here. What this does is whenever you deal direct damage while berserking, and that is the really, really important part of this. If we are not berserking, we do no bleed. This is a bleed build. All of our damage comes from bleed. If we are not berserking, it's like hitting with a wet noodle. You do nothing. It's pretty crazy to see. You go from doing a ton of damage to doing 0. That's why we're running Leap, and Leap is going to give us Berserk while we're fighting bosses. We're running Charge so that we get Berserking there also. Warcry gives you Berserking too. There's a lot of sources to do it, but we are not going to do any damage if we don't have Berserk Ripping procs. For the affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike damage. For the tempers, we want chance to cast Dust Devils twice, and we want Critical Strike damage. On an ideal world, I would have rather have a double on the chance to cast Dust Devils twice. The more Dust Devils we cast, the more bleed goes out. Very, very important that we get as many Dust Devils as we possibly can. For the dual wield weapon, we're going to be running Devilish. After generating 100 Fury, your next direct damage creates 2 Dust Devils. Remember I was talking about possibly messing around with your Harlequin's Crest and your resource generation? Because we're going to be generating a lot of Fury, if more Fury we generate, the more we can deal Dust Devils. So if I had a ton of resource generation, maybe it's going to increase the damage a lot. I don't know. I'll get back to everybody on that. But generating Fury is going to give us 2. And then if we have our chance to cast our double, that could be 4. So we're going to be making sure that we're going to be getting as much Dust Devils out with these aspects. For the affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike damage. I can't believe I didn't brick this item. We're going to be running Dust Devil size for the tempers, and we're going to be running Critical Strike damage also. The reason that we're going to be running Dust Devil size and not Dust Devil damage, when you come over to our other weapon, we're going to be running Fierce Winds. Every time that we shout, we're going to be creating 3 Dust Devils. The bottom part of this, our Dust Devil size is going to be increased by 20%. But not only are they going to be increased, we're going to deal 1% increased damage for each 1% of the size that's been increased. I'm running 50% increased Dust Devil size here for a temper, and I'm also running 39% here plus 20% from this. 110% increased damage to the Dust Devils. Now, in your tempers, you can only cap out at 100%, which is why I didn't put a second temper into this here. Just running 1 and then 2 is going to be plenty. For the affixes, we're going to be doing the exact same thing. Strength, max life, critical strike damage. And then we're going to be running Dust Devil size, like I said, and then critical strike damage here. For the slashing weapon, we're going to be running the Grandfather. The damage stat line on here is not that important. If you can get all stats, that will help increase your strength, and it'll help increase your dexterity. Dexterity equals critical strike chance, and then strength equals skill damage. So if you can get max life in all stats, that will be way better than getting max life and damage, or even putting all of your points into damage. What we're using this for is the aspect on it. Your critical strike damage is increased by 100%. So what that means, if you look at my critical strike damage, as soon as I take off the Grandfather, it drops down by a lot. And put the Grandfather back on, goes back up. If you notice, my critical strike chance also drops because we're taking away that all stats, which is taking away dexterity. I put this back on, and now I'm over armor cap, I have more critical strike chance, and I have more critical strike damage. So that all stats number is actually very important and used in more things than you think it is. For the ring, we're going to be running Giant Strides. Reduce the cooldown of leap by 5 seconds per enemy hit, up to a maximum of 9. Not sure why they settled on 9. Hitting a boss with leap provides the maximum reduction. This is going to be our main source of berserking while we're fighting bosses. We leap onto a boss and it automatically reduces the cooldown by 9 seconds, and it grants us berserking. This is incredibly important to this build running correctly if you want to get through your bosses quickly, especially if you're getting this build together. For the affixes on the ring, a couple different possibilities over that max life. If you want to keep max life, you can, but strength will give you more damage. You can also run lucky hit chance, which is probably going to be my least favorite out of the options, and then we can run chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. It's up to you, whichever one you want to run here, but that is one of the possibilities that you have to run. For the tempers, we're going to be running Warcry cooldown. Now, for this here, it actually would be more beneficial to run Brawling cooldown, because we're going to be running 3 different Brawling skills. We're going to be running Leap, Charge, and you're going to be running Warcry. So if you wanted to get Brawling over your Warcry cooldown, you can do that too. We're also going to be running Damage while Berserking to help get our bonus up to that 300%. For our other ring, we're going to be running the Ring of Starless Sky. The affixes on this aren't the important part. The aspect, however, is very important. Spending your primary resources reduces the cost of your skills and increases your damage by 10% X for 3 seconds, up to 50%. What this means is that we're going to take 50% off of the cost of Whirlwind, which means that we're not going to run out of Fury as fast, or at all. We're also going to do 50x multiplicative more damage. It is going to be a really, really important part of this, and I've tried swapping it out. It is possible to swap out. You just double up this ring here, but it does make a difference. I do notice it. You have to pay way more attention to your Fury generation, or you have to run something on your mace like Fury on Kill. That will help solve the problem a little bit, but that's just a temporary thing. When you're running on the Ring of Starless Sky and you're getting your gear set up, that isn't necessary. For the amulet, we're going to be running Dust Devils. This is getting buffed. So excited for this. This is going to be every time that we cast Whirlwind, we leave a Dust Devil behind. This is why we are tapping Whirlwind, because every single time that we cast Whirlwind, the faster we tap the button, the more Dust Devils we spawn. For the affixes, we're going to be running movement speed, because this is a speed build, critical strike chance, heavy-handed, and for the tempers, damage while berserking, and opposing presence. Ideally for me, this would have been at least 1 into critical strike chance, and then 2 into heavy-handed. What does heavy-handed do? We talk about it a lot, but when we actually look at heavy-handed, the critical strike damage is 5,000%. We take off the amulet with 5 ranks to heavy-handed, we drop 900 critical strike damage. So that is a huge jump in what we're going to be doing for bleed. So if you're looking at your gear and you're like, well, I have everything set up, why is my critical strike damage not as high? It's because of the ranks to heavy-handed. Doesn't even have to be a greater affix. Mine isn't. I just made sure that I got the greater affix on the critical strike chance and then got heavy-handed on it. For the first week of this build, I did not have heavy-handed on here and the build still works. Don't break the bank trying to get a heavy-handed roll. The build will still run without it, but it is definitely a big boost in damage when you do finally find that. If you're having issues finding it, start gambling your obols away for your amulets, and maybe you'll find one that way. You can get some of the best gear in the game from the obol vendors. For the gems, I go back and forth all the time. I like to keep at least 80%. The emeralds give you critical strike chance through giving dexterity. Now it is an option for you to take these out and keep about 80%, because you're still going to see quite a significant amount of gushing wounds going off at 80%, and then you can add more strength gems in. What strength does, it gives you 10% of your strength bonus to all of your skill damage. It's a really, really big multiplier. So taking out those emeralds and putting in your strength gems, as long as you have enough critical strike chance, is actually a good option for you. If you're just getting set up and you're running into these dungeons and you're dying quite a bit, you can put rubies in there. The critical strike chance is going to be important as long as you're alive. In the weapons, I'm running all sapphires. I saw that vulnerable damage was important on the hemorrhage node, so I still wanted to maintain at least 10 to 1. For every 1 vulnerable damage I had, I wanted 10 critical strike chance. So I'm a little under here. For the expertise, we're going to be running two-handed axe. This is important because it will give us 10% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. This is why we want to take that lucky hit chance to make enemies vulnerable on the gloves or even on the ring. The more the enemies are vulnerable, the more damage that we're going to be doing to them. How the expertise works, you don't actually have to have the axe equipped. You can be running a two-handed bludgeoning weapon or a sword, whatever it is. The expertise is there to give you an extra layer of damage or an extra layer of stats when you're not using that weapon. So it's one of those things that you get from doing your barbarian quest. Weapon assignments. We're going to have Whirlwind set to a bludgeoning weapon. The reason that we're going to have this set as a bludgeoning weapon, if you look at the bludgeoning weapons, you deal 15% increased critical strike damage while berserking. Remember, gushing wounds scales off critical strike damage. We're going to be berserking almost the entire time, so this is going to give us a really big boost to our critical strike damage and our overall damage because we're going to be doing more bleed. For charge and for leap, I have them set to the same, but it really doesn't matter for these two. The really important one is that you make sure that Whirlwind is set to the bludgeoning weapon. We're going to go do a quick little gameplay loop so I can show you exactly what this looks like and what I meant by tapping. So I'll see you in the training grounds and we'll hit this up. Okay, for the gameplay loop, a couple different things. On your bar here, this spinning between the moon and the sun, this is your elements. We only get a buff from elements when it's on the sun. That's when it does a physical side. So the downside to elements is that we only have the buff active for 7 seconds and then it's down for 7 seconds. Half the run, we won't be getting any sort of bonus. If you wanted to, you could put intercom on here for a constant 10% across the entire board, but it is completely up to you. In this one here, I have elements running. For your berserking, what you can look for to make sure that you always have berserking up, it's going to be this purple icon right here. When that falls off, then you're going to be doing no damage. So that's really important to make sure that you watch out for. The biggest question to start out with, how do I get fury? We're going to be getting all of our fury from leap. Remember, we put that point into your skill tree where you get 40 fury as soon as you hit one enemy. So if you watch, that 40 is actually going to be multiplied by all of our resource generation. So if we're berserking, we're going to be getting resource generation from prolific fury. We're also going to be getting resource generation from Harlequin's Crest. And if we pop Rallying Cry gives us 56% resource generation also. So to start off your runs, you pop Rallying Cry and then you leap, you have 96 fury from 40. That's how much resource generation we gain from just having the Harlequin's Crest, prolific fury, and running Rallying Cry. So now I'm perfectly full and I'm ready to start running because I don't have to worry about that. So as we're running through this whole dungeon, the more you're leaping, the more your fury is going to be filled up. And did you see all those dust devils? All of those dust devils come just from us generating fury. So this is the whole reason that we decided to run this. Every time we hit enemies, we're going to be casting dust devils when we're running leap, which is incredibly great. As you're running through this rotation here, I did talk a little bit about tapping the Whirlwind button. And what does that mean? When we tap the Whirlwind button, we cast a dust devil. Every time we tap, we cast a dust devil. So as we're tapping, we're casting dust devils. We're going to be generating fury as we go. If the fury starts to get a little low, you leap, and it comes back up. So all of these dust devils here that are spawning are from us generating fury and us casting Whirlwind. We also maintain full life because we cast Whirlwind. We're going to be healing ourselves through Undying. Now, where does charge fit into this? We're going to charge. That's going to give us Unstoppable, activate Ghostwalkers, and it's also going to give us Berserking. Your Dust Devils and your Tyraels will be enough to kill enemies as you move through. You don't necessarily need to run Holy Bolts. If you run Momentum, this will make up for that deficit that you don't have Rallying Cry up. it is going to be incredibly fast because you will now be moving at 200% movement speed through the entire dungeon, no matter what you're doing, no matter what the penalties you get from Whirlwind. This is how you maximize your run speed. It is incredibly fun. It's incredibly fast. It takes a little while to get used to. I still mess up my keybinds on leap and on charge all the time. With the mouse and keyboard, especially for charge, more so than leap. Sometimes leap will go pretty decent distance, sometimes they'll go short. It is a little bit harder to control, but with charge, if I'm standing down here and I can see the enemies over here, and I mouse over those enemies and then I hit charge, charge takes me all the way over here. If I'm standing in the corner and I pick up my controller, and then when charge comes back up, if I use charge, that's as far as I go. It's not game changing. It doesn't change that much, but it does not ruin your runs. I've done some very, very fast runs on controller and very fast runs on mouse and keyboard. I go back and forth between the two, so they're very interchangeable. The differences with when you're running leap is that you can control the distance of your leap with your mouse. If you wanted to leap over here, you can leap over here. If you wanted to leap really, really far, you can leap all the way over into the corner. And then if you wanted to leap right on top of yourself, all you have to do is just leave your mouse right onto your feet, and then you're going to leap right in place. You just leap. Now, when you're running on the controller, if you want to leap in place, you have to just not be moving. You just don't touch anything other than your leap button here, and then that will allow you to leap. You can control the distances, and you actually can leap decently far, unlike charge. So that was a really, really far leap. That was from the corner here, and that hit something that I couldn't even see. So there's not a really big downside to running leap on a controller. It's just more so for charge. But remember, charge is a utility that is going to be used for unstoppable. A little bit of berserking if we do hit somebody with it, but the unstoppable is a really big part of that. It also gets us out of crowd control. So if you get stunned, if you get slowed, and you charge, because charge is available while you are stunned or slowed, it will take that out and it will make you unstoppable and will break you out of that crowd control. It's a lifesaver. So that's the build. Let me know what you think. I want to know how fast you can get. So hit me up in the comments. I'll have the planner in the description. I'm live on YouTube and Twitch pretty much every night. Hopefully I will see you there. Drop in. Let me know how fast you go.